You want the facts? We want to share them with you. Together, we'll boldly unpack the deeper truths inside the real estate industry's most relevant issues. This is Getting Real with Rob. Here's your host, Rob Namfelt.
Hello and welcome to Getting Real with Rob. The Charlotte Douglas International Airport is a huge community asset. Part of that is the involvement of American Airlines and their hub here in Charlotte. As a result, we have Tracy Montross, who is the Regional Director of Government Affairs for American Airlines, in our booth today. Hello, Tracy.
Hello, Rob.
Welcome to Getting Real with Rob.
Thank you. It's good to see you, my friend.
So before we get into the business side of things, let's learn a little bit more about Tracy. You've held a number of positions both here in Charlotte and elsewhere. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I grew up in Northern Virginia, went to Appalachian State for undergrad, went back to the Hill, worked on for Senator Max Baucus for a couple of years, and then moved to Charlotte to go to grad school at UNCC. I got my master's in public administration, worked a couple of campaigns while I was in grad school, and worked for Freedom School Partners as a nonprofit, public service fellow, doing some grant writing and work for them. Found my way into the office of Mayor Anthony Fox, worked for the city of Charlotte for just under 3 years. And when he went to USDOT, I jumped to American Airlines as part of its merger with US Airways. So have been with the airline now 9.5 years. I'm a geek in local government and state government. I know you can relate. And so
geek is a strong term.
Yeah, well, I fit the mold for sure. And so it's, I live in Villa Heights and right near NODA. I've been married for 7 years and have
Congratulations.
Thank you. Have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old boy. So 2 boys, and they keep us busy.
That's great. So that's kind of the typical Tracy background question. Mm-hmm. Let's do a little bit more intensive. We're going to do a speed round.
Okay.
You ready?
Lightning round. Shoot. Okay.
So I'm going to ask you several questions. I want you to give us an immediate response. So where were you born? Hospital name preferable?
Fairfax Hospital in Fairfax, Virginia.
Okay. Favorite color?
Purple.
Superpower, if you had one, what it would be?
Invisibility.
Why?
Ooh, just to be in the room when people don't know you're there. See what they have to say and how they behave when you're not around.
Okay, good. We've learned a little bit more about Tracy. So what about your favorite sport?
I enjoy playing golf. I grew up on a golf course. Actually, my dad was a golf course superintendent. So I earned my allowance as a kid filling divots. And my brother is a golf pro in Charlottesville, Virginia. My family plays golf. So yeah, I'd say that's my favorite sport. It's part of what our family enjoys spending time on.
Excellent. So I could talk to you about my lawn then? Would you have some tips for me? No?
Definitely not. I'd leave that to my father for sure.
Okay, fair enough. And you prefer to play as opposed to watch. Do you watch as well, or?
I mean, it's always on in the background at my house, but I'd much prefer to have a beer on the golf course for sure.
Got it. All right. Sorry, I bogged down the speed round. Musician. Who's your favorite musician?
Dave Matthews Band.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And then what's your favorite city or location?
Well, Charlotte, North Carolina comes in number one always.
Of course.
Come on. I'm an ambassador for CLT.
I know.
I really enjoy traveling. And so experiencing new places. And that's been a big benefit of this job is the opportunity to get on the road. And my husband and I are going to go to Montreal in June for a quick weekend trip. I love that direct flight. Never been. So I'm going to practice.
I love how you work that direct flight.
That is the perk of being in a hub community, all the access to all these great destinations. So
that's great. All right. You mentioned your husband. Last question. Where did you meet him?
At a bar in Boone.
Excellent.
We're both kids from the DC metro area. We found each other at Appalachian State, watching a Duke Maryland game. We were the only people in there rooting for the Terps. So,
do you remember who won?
I think Duke won, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's likely, right? Okay, great. All right. So we know a little bit more about Tracy now.
Yeah.
Tell us about a typical day. What's a typical day like? People ask me, and I'm like, every day is different.
Yeah.
For you, what?
Yeah, every day is different. This industry is pretty crazy in terms of the variety of issues that we deal with. So I cover 7 states for the airline. DCA and Charlotte are my 2 hubs. So I spend quite a bit of time looking at and tracking legislation out of Raleigh, Richmond, Nashville, Annapolis, Columbia, making sure that airport operations and whether it's legislative issues on tax or workforce, labor, that they're all aligned with our interests. And so a lot of state legislative activity, monitoring what's happening at state capitals. And then within airport communities, staying close to stakeholders in those, whomever has governance responsibility for the airport. It varies across my territory, but here in Charlotte, I spent a lot of time engaging with Charlotte City Council, community groups, a variety of other stakeholders with interests, including REBIC.
Thank you for the shout out.
Yeah, you bet.
The last few years have been a challenge, not just for Charlotte, for the region, the state, the nation, the world. Obviously, that has filtered into the airline industry and some of the challenges with COVID. What was, during that time, what was kind of did you have an aha moment of either, wow, we need to do this differently, or wow, why did I get into this, or oh my gosh, is this going to ever end?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone in the airline industry has PTSD from the pandemic. And yet, so many of my colleagues have been around for decades and have seen 9/11 and global recessions and consolidations and bankruptcies. So there is a lot of resiliency within the industry, and for team members who have jet fuel in their blood and have seen, a lot of different events. For me, I think the pandemic, the aha moment was, the years leading up to the pandemic and the effort I put into understanding the industry, building relationships in communities, having those points of contacts on the ground were incredibly helpful and critical when I was in the midst of the pandemic, working from my home office, calling to understand the impact of local ordinances on airport operations. I mean, everything from where you hang signage to what's the distance between people in a queuing line, or, there's a whole host of issues that we were trying to unpack as local and state governments were addressing pandemic precautions. And so that was a big aha, is, the amount of time that you can spend before the crisis to build relationships, to know the business, to that will all come in handy in the case of emergency.
What do you think there'll be things that we've done differently next, if there is a next time around, or what sort of things? How did it prepare you, I guess, for the next time to act even more quickly?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting lessons too, at least for American, was as the pandemic was happening, there was this separate track, call it kind of our green flag plan. So think of it from the NASCAR race, right? Where we had this point in which the operation has been pulled down. We're really dealing with the effects of not having passengers in demand. But at the same time, the company was looking at ways to position itself for when that demand returned, that we would be ready to run, right? So that green flag on the track would send us going. And so that meant preventative aircraft maintenance. When we weren't flying those airplanes, they were being maintained. It meant looking at our airport operations, looking at our workforce and the, kind of training and staffing that we could do when our team members had time to engage in that. So that green flag plan, I think, is a great lesson for any business. When you do have these periods of, peaks and valleys, how do you use those valleys to then prepare yourself for that peak? And a lot of that work happened during the pandemic. And it's a good thing, because I don't think anyone fully expected demand to return the way that it has. And we were ready to meet that demand when it did.
You touched on some of the tax-related issues, some of the legislative things. I guess let's delve into some of the initiatives that American is involved in right now, both at the local level as well as the state and maybe the federal level. And then let's tie that into kind of what our members ought to know and any real estate professionals ought to know kind of going forward. So what are your main things you're working on right now?
Yeah, thanks. And compliments to REBIC for the work that you guys have been doing around advocacy and government affairs. And you've become, you've always had a presence in that space. But under your leadership, Rob, I'm really impressed. You've got a podcast to talk about these issues. So
you're very kind. Your check will show up in your mailbox.
It's the other way around. Remember, we're a member of REBIC,
that's
right? And it's in part because we recognize that there's so much shared value and information that can that your members want to know about the airport. and that we want stakeholders in this community and grasstops advocates to help promote. And so there's a couple of issues that are on our radar right now. I'd say the number one legislative issue at the state level in North Carolina is the extension of the exemption on jet fuel sales tax. And this is an issue that REBIC has been involved in. We appreciate your support. In 2015, when the legislature advanced tax reform, they also advanced the exemption of business inputs from the tax code. Jet fuel is a business input. We can't take off the ground without it. And so as in 2015, as the legislature was moving towards the exemption of business inputs, they included jet fuel in that. They did put a 4-year sunset on it. So it did expire in 2020, and it expires at the end of this year. And so we have this legislative session to advance an extension of the sunset, which is certainly valuable to the hub, given that we are 600 flights a day out of CLT. We've got 23 countries that we're serving now, 178 destinations. But 80% of our customers never leave the airport. They are connecting passengers. And so when you think about the taxation of the hub, we need jet fuel at a competitive cost. We need the airport to run in a competitive manner, so that we can connect all those passengers through and make it the connecting factory that it is. So the tax exemption on jet fuel does make a difference, and certainly our ability to fly here in a cost-effective manner. We've also seen across the state that having the jet fuel tax exemption has benefited other airports across the region. So, we've seen incredible growth in Asheville, in Wilmington. Raleigh-Durham has had a lot of new service. Ultra low-cost carriers are starting to increase their presence in the state. That's in part because it's better to buy fuel here than it is in Tennessee. And so we have a good case to make for the extension of the jet fuel sales tax exemption, and I hope that it will be supported this year. We are included in the House budget, so hope that will move forward.
Great. Do you see any hangups, or just too early to tell at this point?
I'm cautiously optimistic that it'll be included this year. But again, we track everything that's happening at the legislature, and who knows about, especially with recent events, how that could unfold. Okay.
All right. Well, we will advocate on your along with you.
Thank you. Well, and again, I think it does. It's an important issue to American because we're the largest fuel consumer in the state. We also serve about 73% of all seats that are available in North Carolina on aircraft, and so this has a big impact for us, but it does benefit all the other airlines that are serving the state, and so we all collectively are asking for this support, and we ask that our partners who have an interest in the growth of air service, that they would support us as well. So the hospitality and tourism community has been really helpful and effective, as have economic developers like your members.
Great.
I'd say the other issue that you're hearing a lot about is around workforce development. The challenges we're facing within our workforce, not just the labor market and issues that everyone is facing, but issues around pilot training and recruitment, and then aircraft maintenance technicians has been a big challenge for us and will continue to be. The pilot pipeline really got impacted during the pandemic because we saw so many pilots retire early. And then it also stalled the progression of pilots who were in their training from getting their certification on time. And so we have this gap right now. It's definitely impacting regional air service. At any given time, we have the equivalent of about 100 aircraft that we can't fly because we don't have crews on them, or crews to be able to staff them. And so that means that it's fewer frequencies to stations like Lynchburg or New Bern or Pitt Greenville, whatever regional airport is dependent on that service is seeing an impact. And so we are very focused on building out that pilot pipeline. It starts first with Congress, and FAA reauthorization will have quite a bit of activity around workforce development this year. FAA reauthorization expires in September. So a lot happening at the federal level. And we're looking at how to improve the pilot pipeline, how to improve the pipeline for aircraft maintenance technicians, which requires just a 2-year A and P certification. And so what can we do as a company to both invest in resources in the communities that we serve and the hubs that we serve in particular, to help build out that pilot pipeline and that AMT pipeline. And I'm really excited that Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools has actually stood up an aviation magnet program at E.E. Waddell High School for the fall 2023 semester. That program will include a build, fix, fly pathway. So for aerospace engineering, to build, to aviation maintenance, to fix, and then to fly for that pilot group. And so this will be open to freshmen and sophomores this fall, who can then begin their at E.E. Waddell, begin that training. And then we're looking to kind of formalize a partnership with E.E. Waddell so that those students have a path to go after graduation and come work for the largest airline in the world at our second largest hub here in Charlotte. So very excited about what CMS is doing. West Cabarrus High School also has a similar program, and great opportunity to support students going through that as well. So this is, if you have young people in your life, this is a great industry for them to pursue, great income available to both at the pilot and AMT side. So hope that we can get the word out. That's great.
That's great to hear. It's interesting how some of the similar challenges are being faced on the construction and the development side. We have folks that don't have the skills. We're looking for more of the trades. And so the similar programs have been started at other schools around the area as well.
That's right.
Those kind of things.
We actually went to the Rock and got to see that program and how we could replicate something like that for dual credit with Aviation Institutes of Maintenance, AIM. They're located over off of 74, South Independence Boulevard. And they have that 2-year AMP FAA training and certification. And so what we're hoping is that juniors and seniors within Charlotte Mecklenburg can start going over to AIM, begin their credits before they graduate. And then by the time they graduate, they're 2 years ahead of, or at least a year ahead of, through credits of their peers. And then, they're coming out of school and easily make 6 figures working for the airline. So
that's great.
Yeah, great opportunity. But ROC was definitely a program we wanted to model as we looked at how to stand this up.
That's fantastic. I love that. I love that planning for the future and seeing how it pans out.
Well, and since planning for the future, the other big opportunity. So we've talked about jet fuel tax. We talked about workforce development. As we look to the future, the other issue that is definitely on our radar is around the modernization of flight paths and flight traffic within this community. And so that has a lot to do with the impact on noise. And I'll say the airport in 2017 stood up, the Charlotte Douglas Airport stood up an airport community roundtable in 2017 to respond to community complaints around aircraft noise and flight paths. The timing of that was related to the FAA's implementation of Metroplex, which was the kind of redesign of flight paths in our region. So the ACR, the Airport Community Roundtable, has been meeting since 2017 to evaluate flight paths and the impact of noise on communities. And in 2020, they sent a letter to the FAA suggesting some potential recommendations and changes. As a result of that letter, the airport and the FAA and a consultant named Landemer Brown are now working on what they call a Part 150. Part 150 is a federally approved program for airports to identify solutions to mitigate noise. And that Part 150 process has begun. They're working with the consultant to do a lot of data, deep data dives into what the existing noise profile looks like in our region. And then also to make recommendations for if you were to change flight paths to improve noise or potentially disperse noise so that more communities share it, but there's less of a burden over certain, communities or these kind of finite rails that we see within flight traffic. So that this process is underway. They've done their first 2 public meetings, but I do hope there will be increased turnout through the rest of the public engagement. The website to learn more on the Part 150 is www.cltpart150.com.
Why don't you say it again?
www.cltpart150.com. And on that website, you'll have more information about what is being considered. as part of this this process to mitigate airspace and noise. And in doing so, we hope that we will start to look at our region and the flight traffic that's around here for the future. We've been flying the same way for a long time, the same kind of flight paths since the 1970s.
And hasn't technology changed quite a bit?
Technology has changed quite a bit. Land use around the airport has changed quite a bit. And I think there's some real important questions we should be asking about the modernization of those flight paths and our flight traffic, whether there are more sustainable ways to fly to reduce emissions, to reduce noise, to reduce jet fuel consumption, which is certainly something, as I mentioned, is very important to American.
Sure.
And then also to look at really the future of airspace in this market. You're the 6th busiest airport in the world based on flight traffic, right? So we have a lot of operations. A lot of them are on these more regional small birds, smaller aircraft. But how do we want to protect CLT for the long run? And looking at flight traffic is an important way to do that. So we'd love to see more public engagement, more interest in this process. The recommendations, once the community submits those recommendations, Charlotte City Council will sign off on them. They'll be submitted to the FAA. FAA will come back to the community, and to the extent any of those recommendations are going to be implemented, we'll kick off a NEPA process and environmental assessment. But this is the first the real kind of milestone to look at potential changes and improvements for airspace here.
And for those who are not geeks, the NEPA process is the National Environmental Protection Act.
Yes, thank you.
Passed by Congress back in, I believe, the 70s. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a big change, but I think it sounds like a positive change going forward. We will be happy to promote that on our website as well. To try to get that's the toughest thing, is trying to get public engagement, right?
Yeah.
You want to make sure people feel like they're at the table and part of it.
Exactly. And I think there's a big interest for your members in following this too. I mean, where flight paths go and how they are dispersed or not does have an impact on disclosure. It does have an impact on the perception of that home or property. And certainly as we think about compatible land uses, we want to see more commercial and industrial uses around the airport. We want to see less residential under flight paths, but we do need the real estate community to pay attention to these issues and be an advocate because there's a lot of various interests at play here.
Yeah, no, agreed. And industrial use was actually one of the areas that are compatible for that were lacking last time when we did the 2040 plan, and now we're dealing with the UDO, which, by the way, implementation date is June 1st for those who haven't been paying attention. But industrial use and how that will work near the airport and around the airport makes a lot of sense for us to plan going forward. Tracy, is there anything else that we haven't touched on today, either about you personally, although I think we covered that pretty extensively, or about what American do? I mean, 6th largest airport or 6th busiest airport in the world. In the world, yep. American fills 75% of the seats.
73% of all seats in North Carolina are on American.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how many employees?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I forgot to mention 13,000 employees in the Charlotte region. So representing work groups like pilots and flight attendants, mechanics, but also gate agents and baggage handlers. The larger economic impact of Charlotte Douglas is 120,000 employees because of all of the other services that are provided around the airport. But that 13,000, we're the 5th largest employer in Mecklenburg County. In addition to the 13,000 we have here in this region, we have another 2,000 employees across the state, including 2 reservation call centers, one in Winston-Salem and one in Cary. So if you are an Executive Platinum member and you're calling the reservation desk, you are likely talking to a North Carolinian. And I imagine you're getting the benefit of Southern hospitality on those calls. But we are a major employer in the state. And so again, we do value very much our relationship to local government because this is where our team members live, work, and play.
That's great. Well, and it has such a huge impact on the region, both with the amount of people that you employ. Businesses, when they look to relocate to a different place, they look at Charlotte and the Charlotte region because they look at our airport and they think, wow, we can get folks in and out of there to all kinds of places around, not just the country, but the world. There is a reason people keep relocating here, and that's one of them. And we need to always keep that in mind going forward.
Well, thanks for saying that, because I think, it is easy to take for granted what it means to have a hub. I've heard before, there are communities that have a hub and communities that want to have a hub, and that's what distinguishes the two of them. And we do need to find a way to protect the asset that we have here in Charlotte. 178 destinations. We're serving 23 countries. We just added our third daily flight to London Heathrow. So we're a major connection now for the Southeast region abroad. But all of that international service and nonstop domestic service, the strong Caribbean market that we have, all of that is really important for economic development, for business recruitment, but it is a benefit that local passengers and local travelers get as well. And so I do want to just say thank you again to REBIC for helping to elevate the interests of CLT and its growth and potential and the hub as well. Again, the airport is not much without a hub. So it's Americans' investment that has really set up the Charlotte region for continued growth. And so we're grateful to be a partner here. And I'm grateful to have great advocates like Rob and REBIC who are helping to represent the interests of CLT.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you for your time today. Tracy Montross, Regional Director of Government Affairs for American Airlines. Thanks
I like getting real with you, Rob.
I should let you do the sign off all the time. I'll just record it.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Getting Real with Rob. This podcast is produced by the Real Estate and Building Industry Coalition in Charlotte, North Carolina. Learn more about us at REBIC.com. That's REBIC.com. We'll talk to you next time.